Hi, this is Mrs. Boykin, and today we're going to talk about factor by grouping, that is factoring with 4 terms. Each one of these is considered a term. Here's my first term, my second term to include my plus sign, my third term, and of course my fourth term. 4 terms. So let's go ahead and clear this out and get started. Always, with any factoring problem, you need to look for the greatest common factor. Now, if you're using the TI Inspire in school, you can go to the calculator page, and if you type GCD into your calculator, parentheses, your first number, comma, and your second number, you'll find the greatest common divisor or greatest common factor of those two numbers. With that result, you add in your third, do it again, get the common factor, and then the fourth time use your last number, and that will allow you to calculate if you're not aware what your greatest common factor is. For our first problem here, though, I'm looking at it, and all these 4 terms can be divided by 6. So let's begin with getting out our greatest common factor. It's only going to help us make our problem much easier to work with if we can reduce the size of these numbers. In addition to factoring out a 6, I'm looking at a squared, a, and an a. I can also factor out an a from each of my 4 terms. So factoring out the 6a, when I divide, let's see what remains. I'm going to use a different color, and the result would be 7ab, because a squared divided by a is a. Of course, b is not canceled out, so it remains, plus 6a minus 336 divided by 6 is a negative 56. The a's, of course, are canceling out, and the b remains. And a negative 288 divided by 6 is a negative 48, and the a's cancel. A divided by a equals 1. Here's now my 4 terms that I have left after factoring out my greatest common factor. So let's continue. We're next going to group them 2 at a time, grouping my first 2 terms and my last 2 terms. And of course, all these are still being added together. I just added grouping symbols. So let's take a look at the first 2. 7 and 6, I can't think of anything I can divide those 2 by, but I certainly can divide both by an a. So my a gets factored out, and what remains is 7b plus 6, because the a's cancel out here and here. Out of the next 2, I can divide both of those terms by a negative 8. Now here's a little clue for you, and this holds true for any problem. When this sign here is a negative, this must be a negative you're dividing by. It doesn't matter what this sign is. The key is, what is the sign of this term here? If it's positive, you're dividing by a positive. In this case, it's a negative, so I'm going to divide by a negative. So once I factored out that negative 8, I'm bringing it down. When I divide, I get 56 divided by 8. Of course, negative divided by a negative is a positive. The b stays. Negative 48 divided by a negative 8 is a positive 6. Now the key is that what's in red now must match. That's an indication that you did your problem correctly. So let's bring it all together. Now this 6a, he carried down and remains part of our problem every step of the way. So he must be here in my final solution. The 2 terms in green, my a minus 8, come together, and my 7b plus 6, my red terms that match. All 3 parts must be present for my final solution. And that is how you would factor that first problem. I'm going to do 2 more problems for you, but if at any time if you want to stop, I recommend writing these into your notes so that you have further examples to go by when referring back to work your own problems. Let's take a look at our next slide. Okay, our next problem, once again, just like the others, we're going to see if there's a greatest common factor. We always want to factor that out if one exists. And I'm looking through my problems, looking at 24, 48, 30, and 60. Each of those can be divided by 6. Let's take a look at the variables. Sometimes you'll be able to divide by a variable as well, sometimes not. M to the third, M to the third, M squared, M squared. All of them contain an M variable, and I'm limited by my smallest exponent, M squared. They all had an M squared I can divide by. So, factoring out the 6M squared, what remains is 4mn minus negative 48 divided by 6 is a negative 8. M to the third divided by M squared is M. Negative 30 divided by 6 is a negative 5. The M squareds cancel out, and I have an N. And 6 divided by 6 is a positive 10. And M squared divided by M squared cancels out. Let's keep factoring. I'm going to group the first two in my parentheses. The last two, don't forget to include the sign in parentheses. And now we're going to look at these two terms, deciding what we can divide by. 4 and 8, both of those are divisible by 4. And I see an M present in both terms. So I'm going to factor out that 4M. What remains is 4 divided by 4 is 1. M divided by M is 1. I'm left with an N minus 2. And again, these M's are canceling. Over here, I'm going to divide. Again, if this is a negative, I'm going to divide by a negative. And I'm going to divide by negative 5. Both 5 and 10 are divisible by 5. After I factor it out, I'm now dividing. And negative divided by negative is a positive N. And positive 10 divided by a negative 5 is a negative 2. Okay, bringing it all together, I've got my greatest common factor for my first step that I did. The 2 in purple. 4m minus 5 was my first binomial, and the ones that match in red, I can see they're the same, giving me confidence I did the problem correctly. N minus 2, and this would be my complete final answer for the second problem. 6m squared times 4m minus 5 times n minus 2. My last problem, and also my last problem, I'm also going to show you how to check these by multiplying them back through. My last problem, I'm looking at this to see, do I have a greatest common factor? I'm hoping, because this is an awful big number, these two, I'm thinking I can divide all these terms by 8. Verifying in my calculator, I can. So I'm going to divide each of these by 8. Looking for a variable. Do I have a variable in common? I do not. This has no variables, so. And when I divide, I'm going to get 24 divided by 8, 3xy. 120 divided by 8 gives me negative 15x. 64 divided by 8 is a positive 8y. And a negative 320 divided by 8 is a negative 40. Okay, so here are my 4 terms, and I continue the process. So I'm going to group my first 2 and my last 2, and deciding what can I divide these first 2 terms by. Well, I can not only divide by a 3, but I can also divide by x. So I'm going to bring down my 3x and divide. The 3's cancel, my x's cancel, so I'm left with y minus 5. And my x's are canceling. Okay, And now we go back to our second grouping. 8 and 40 can be divided by 8. I know it's positive because this is positive. And I should have done that in blue. Not that it matters, but it helps everyone see where I'm pulling my numbers from. So the positive 8 gets factored out. And what remains? 8 divided by 8 cancels out. I'm left with y. Negative divided by positive is a negative 5. And I can see my purples match. Don't forget to bring down as part of your answer your very first greatest common factor. So your final answer is 8 times your first binomial in blue, 3x plus 8, times what they shared in common, y minus 5. And that is your final answer. So now if you're wondering how is it that we can make sure that we have the correct answer, let me go to a clean page. And let's write down what my answer was from that last problem. It was 8 times 3x plus 8 times y minus 5. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start by multiplying a binomial times a binomial. Some people have heard of the FOIL method, where you multiply the first, the outer, the inner, and the last. I personally like to use the box method. I feel students make less errors using the box method. So I'm putting my binomials one on the side, one on top. It does not matter where you're putting them. There's no difference if I put one on the side versus the bottom. And now I'm going to multiply through. So 3x times y is 3xy. 3x times a negative 5 is a negative 15x. 8 times y is a positive 8y. And positive 8 times 5 is a negative 40. Pulling everything out, I get 3xy minus 15x plus 8y minus 40. Don't forget we have to multiply everything by 8. So I'm going to bring down the 8, multiplying it through. And now I get distributive property. 8 times 3 is 24xy. 8 times a negative 15x is a negative 120x. 8 times 8y is a positive 64y. And 8 times a negative 40 is a negative 320. And if you check back to the original slide, this is the problem that we started with, that we factored, this being our factored answer. And there's equivalent expressions. One is in a polynomial form, one is in your fully factored form. I hope this helped you. If you would like, feel free to rewind it, pause it at any time. If you still are struggling with it, please do your best and show me what you have as far as the problems that you've been able to work, and come to CAV morning. Have a great day.